Thank you. Thanks to everybody for being here. It's Friday. It's beautiful outside, so thank you. I'm going to revisit something that the previous two speakers have mentioned, and it's this past, this kind of prehistory. It seems that all the knowledge we're developing on plants is now, and it's for a future, and it's so we can move into a future, but what about all those thousands of years, or at least the 5 centuries that we have, good registered records. So my larger project, which is a digital monograph on this dry gardens, I've switched the name out of herbaria, because the herbaria are after the 18th century, technically, although the word was used before, as we shall see. But it's on dry gardens, which was the most commonly, named. Why planting, thinking, dwelling? Some of you may be familiar with the work of Martin Heidegger, and that's where it comes from. I'm going to spend the 15 minutes in 3 points. One of them is the title. I'm going to go into that a little bit more, and then into natural philosophy. What natural philosophy? Why natural philosophy? And then the dry gardens, and 4 points: their names, their locations, definition, and a few sample readings. Again, we have 15 minutes. This is a project that is taking me a lifetime. So, planting, dwelling, thinking. Here's a key citation from Heidegger's point, and the way it connects with my study of the dry gardens is that observing and studying plants is a set of processes that belongs with dwelling and thinking. And I think that that's where arts and sciences really meet, where humanities and social sciences and sciences meet in the dwelling and the thinking. Natural philosophy as precursor of modern science, also linked to natural history more focused on taxonomies, on calculations, on description. There's a great book by Ogilvy called The Science of Describing, and it goes into all of this. I'll be happy to go into that at another time. Anxieties, plants by one name. How do you put one name to such diversity as we see in the natural world? Plants by numbers, how many of them? How many parts do they have? So that also is. And of course, type. We'll go back to that in a second, and I'm glad that it was mentioned earlier. History of sciences and histories of philologies. Why? Because dry gardens are not buildings as herbaria are right now, museums as in a building. These museums were held in books, because naturalists would actually take them with them out in the field, until of course Clusius, the great naturalist, said, "This is too clunky, this book is too big, it's on my way." And then he completely disavowed it, and then he started painting plants instead. So we see also that there's a discomfort with the book as a platform, but it's actually something that both scientists and humanists go back to. There's a notion of elusive character of early modern thought that I am considering, and of course I need a lot more than 15 minutes, but I wanted to plant that seed, no pun intended. So you would think that early modern thought cannot be measured by what we do today. Today there are all kinds of different anxieties. Back then this elusiveness was in trying to come up with knowledge that could be set, as it was after the 18th century. But until then, these books are a reflection of this change, and each one is different from the others, as we're going to see in the samples. The histories from these books, we're going to see a couple of samples too. Are they bound? Are they not? Is the binding rich? Is the binding falling apart? Are the animals moving into the covers as well, or just in the inside of the pages, and so forth and so on. And finally, knowledge about nature, both physical and human, from reading these books. Here's a quotation from Andrea Cesalpino, one of the naturalists who created one of these dry gardens. And I wanted to point out that he denotes that the ancients were great at trying to be the masters of this great number of plants in the natural world. But then he says at the bottom we're doing it wrong because medicine is starting to become mechanical. And we actually have to be more philosophical about it. We have to think and dwell more into this. So we're going to see some examples of that. So the names, we have ortosico or dry gardens. You have a whole variety of them. Ortusiemalis is also important because as ago, the first one to actually give us how do you put together an herbar or dried garden before Linnaeus in the 18th century. He actually gave us the recipe for the glue even. He called them ortusiemalis, which means winter garden. And he said these are very, very valuable objects because when it's dry outside, when it's cold outside, you can actually be inside with your winter garden and actually study nature. That's another name. Later known as herbarium, as we have seen. Locations, mostly public, state-owned archives. For instance, Naturalis Biodiversity Center, which is an example of place to hold historical collections, as they call them. And they have three extremely important ones, Cadera, Oaks, and Tibi. We're going to see some of those later. Botanical gardens, as in the one in Basel. Bouwings, which was one of the first to be digitized, and now they're under construction, or they were last year when I visited. And the place is kind of upside down. The curator who actually put together that for the modern era retired, and the new person is the professor of history of botany who thinks that the history of botany didn't exist before the 18th century. He and I had very interesting conversations about this. And of course, the collection it was dislodged. We'll talk about that in a moment. And university departments of botany, such as the one in Florence, where the Cesarpino and the Merini are, and university botanical gardens. This is just a sample to give you an idea. These are the most quoted, and if you see the places where they are, they're in rare book rooms, they are in Natural History Museum, they are, as I have said, in state archives. But also I wanted for you to see this sample. There are 10,000 plants between these books. So these books alone hold 10,000 specimens. In total, there are 33,000. We're going to see them in a moment. But I wanted you to see, this is the Florence archive. These are the two dry gardens. And the rest are the documents post-19th century. So you see the enormity of the collections. You were mentioning hundreds of thousands at UGA. This is one of the most amazing places to study plants, and actually Garanepi, the curator, is a tremendously exciting person to talk with because she actually was the responsible for completely dislodging. Dislodging a book is to take the covers out and throw them away. So she kept the covers at least. But now she went through a crisis thinking, did I do wrong in dislodging them after she had published that? I said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. We're just learning here from one side and the other. But I wanted you to see the size, how tiny they are next to the others. This is another one, and the 5 collections that are held in El Escorial are just the base of that cabinet, again with the enormity of the royal collection of books in the monastery of El Escorial. That's also another. This is the Bowling collection, and it's this little cabinet next to the whole botanical section. That was 19 volumes. So that is the second largest after the Aldrovandi in Bologna. So a definition, we've seen that before, with the herbarium, except for the fact that it's not a building, it's a book, or a collection of books. So dry gardens and herbaria are the same thing, but I insist on calling them dry gardens simply so we remember that once upon a time these were books. And what does that mean? That's what I'm asking. And I'm asking us to remember. Even if they're dislodged, it's okay, but let us remember. They had attributed authors. Herbaria don't have attributed authors. We saw that there's the founder, ¿verdad, of the Emory Herbarium, But are you the author? Because you have, you know what I mean? So herbaria, modern herbaria have people who have contributed to them, but dried gardens actually had authors. And that is typical of the book, and that I think it means something. 16th century Europe, 44 cited collections, 37 we are able to touch right now, because they're in some archive. The other 7 are lost so far. 33,000 plants. The total number of specimens is unknown. And of course, some plants appear in one and the other, and they appear sometimes in the same collection, twice, 2 different specimens of the same plant. We're going to see that too. The properties, as a philologist, I think of the properties of a dried garden, the binding, the paper, and the plants. And what stories do they tell? So that's something that I would like to keep remembering. The functions and objectives, how are a dried garden functions different from a herbarium? Are they different? I don't think so. I think that we're all looking after this live plants and dead plants question that we heard earlier, no? And then traditionally associated with natural history, even though if I have my way, we'll think about them a little bit more as places for natural philosophy. So here's the transition. Here's the live plant. Here's some schematics. Here's drawing. There was an enormous genre of plant illustration in the 16th century. And there's the lodging of the plant, dead or alive. We can keep thinking about that. This is one of the herbaria, one of the dried gardens in El Escorial. And I just wanted you to see the index, because indices sometimes go by alphabetical order. Sometimes they go by the order in which the plant was plucked and dressed, pressed and glued and so forth. And sometimes they do 3 different indices. What does that mean? What does that tell us about the preoccupations of science at that time? Here you see the total of the 4 volumes. This one has in total 950 plants, but it has 837 listed. So it's also the inconsistency in the counting of the plants that is critical. So here we have an exercise in reading. These 2 are held at the Naturalis Biodiversity Center. In the left-hand side, you have the Entivi, which is a very luxurious volume. We're going to see another picture of the Entivi. And the one on the right, it's from the Leonhard Raulf. Raulf went to the Middle East, where Dr. Krusher was telling us that, there's all those tomatoes and all that soy happening. And there you have it. So that melanzana, in Italian melanzana, is eggplant. So you have these 2 plants are called melanzana, but are they the same plant? The inscriptions tell us that the ancient name or the dried garden name is melanzana in both of them, and then the recent, this is the name, the modern name, solanum, it's the same. But is it the same? I'm asking, Depends on where the plants come from and what kind of properties they may have, The books themselves also tell very different stories, okay? The one on the left, the Entivi, is extremely luxurious. We cannot see it very well, but the binding is so luxurious that it's almost like a building. I mean, you would have to destroy, the pages in order to dislodge that. The paper is magnificent. And actually, the first plant you see in the cover of my presentation is from the Entivi, So that, look at the quality of that book on the pages, on the side. This book has never been restored. While the ones on the right, which come from the Aldrovandi collection, 17 volumes, and they are all falling apart. They were bound with recycled paper. It was poor, and yet, for the purposes of history of science, that is the dried garden to go to, because that is what has value. Aldrovandi as a character in the history of science, while the other one only talks about beautiful flowers and the smiling gardener and so forth and so on. Okay. Now here's 3 very quick images. This is the dislodging from the 19th century. So this was a single volume. It went to 3. You have them there, but it was re-sewn together. It was rebound. Here you see what's happening in 2002. Nepi got to the Firenze, as curator to the Firenze Botanical section, and she immediately said that has to be dislodged. They were also digitizing the collection, so that's another part of the story that is important. And finally, this is what you see today, if you're going to consult. So again, these are the books from the 19th century, and then the dislodging, and finally the little booklets looking more like modern science and artifacts that can be trusted. Here's one of the exciting discoveries in dry gardens. Somebody in the 19th century saw that this is a type, and it put a hot pink sticker, type, and told the entire story in that little white sticker. You know, there's Arum and there's Binum and there's all kinds of amazing, histories about that are annotated. That is important too, how many, and this is from the Middle Eastern collection, if there's an important type, what happens to these books? Well, as it happened in Aldrovandi, some people say, I'm consulting this, and they get there with their knives, and they go boom, 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 and they take that specimen with them. Where do the specimens end up? Are they contributing? So I was glad to hear that now there are regulations that, kind of keep us from that happening. So finally, there are some of these books that were lost and have appeared. So I just leave you with a few images from the Merini, just so you can see the state of these plants 5 centuries later, which to me is truly the most astounding. If I were a scientist, perhaps my mind would be driving me to the specimen and the blah, 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 and the future. But as a philologist, I sat down in these archives and I was humbled at the fact. Of course, my favorite was a plant of cannabis, which 5 centuries later seems like it was just plucked yesterday, even better looking than this one. Here's the mandragora, the mandrake root. What happened to the root? Of course, you cannot put that thick thing in between 2 pages. What does that mean for the scientific knowledge of that? And the cartoons that some of these books have, which are tremendous. I leave you with these 2 images. Thank you.